A deadly trend with opioids in San Diego and the risk for patients who buy drugs online.
Someone obviously dropped the ball. You know, was it funding? Was it manpower? Was it the skill set?
Bracing for another tropical storm, plus the questions about how the infrastructure will hold up in New Orleans.
I have a presence. I give respect, I get respect. It's like do or die for me. I'll push you and I'll push you and I'll push you, and I could be a little bit anxious, but that anxious and that nervous energy makes me get these images.
The artist who didn't drop a beat and made a name for himself with California hip-hop. KPBS Evening Edition starts right now. Good evening. Thanks for joining us. I'm Kenny Goldberg. San Diego law enforcement sounded the alarm bell today about counterfeit opioids like fentanyl. KPBS reporter Eric Anderson says overdose deaths are on the rise.
The region's acting U.S. attorney says law enforcement officials are noticing a dangerous trend that reflects what's happening around the country. About 65,000 overdoses were linked to manufactured opioids last year. Acting U.S. Attorney Alana Robinson says officials have tracked a dramatic increase in the amount of drugs confiscated and the number of fentanyl-related deaths here in San Diego County.
Every law enforcement agency at the federal, state, and local level are on high alert because of this trend.
Robinson says more than 40 people have died because of fentanyl-related overdoses in the county. Another 10 deaths are thought to be linked. She says that's a significant increase over last year. Law enforcement officials also say an increasing amount of illicit fentanyl is coming into the United States across the border. U.S. Customs and Border Protection Officer Pete Flores says 3/4 of all the fentanyl seized at the border is coming through ports of entry in Southern California.
Coming in on land border and coming in across the country in our mail and express consignment facility. So an issue for us to address nationwide, but bulk-wise, we're seeing that here in California.
Authorities also worry about counterfeit oxycodone pills that contain the much stronger drug fentanyl. People who buy the drugs online or from drug dealers have no way of knowing what's in the pill. Robinson says people are risking their lives by taking medication that's been made by drug cartels south of the border. Eric Anderson, KPBS News.
County officials say the region's first flu death of the season occurred last weekend. The victim was a 86-year-old San Diego man who had an underlying medical condition. The County Health and Human Services Agency says there have been 203 confirmed cases of the flu so far this season, 143 more than at this time last year. The county is sponsoring several no-cost flu shot clinics this month. You can find information about those at sdiz.org. The flu vaccine is also available at doctors' offices and pharmacies. California is pushing back against a Trump administration decision to roll back women's birth control coverage. State Attorney General Javier Becerra said today he's considering filing a lawsuit. U.S. health officials say the revision to the Obamacare rule will allow employers to opt out of providing birth control coverage if they have a religious or moral objection to it. Reproductive health groups say the new change could result in substantially higher birth control costs for women.
What this could mean if your employer isn't covering it, an IUD could run you over $1,000. Contraceptive pills can be, anywhere from, $50 to $100 throughout the year. So, we're talking about really significant expenses for what should be essential health care that everyone gets covered.
Federal health officials say they expect the change will only impact a small minority of employees. Health insurance plans are waiting to hear whether federal subsidies that lower the cost of premiums will continue. President Donald Trump has repeatedly threatened to cut them. If they disappear, consumers will pay the price. Covered California says they're setting next year's rates on Wednesday no matter what. If there isn't a federal commitment by then, the exchange will impose a 12.4% premium increase on silver tier customers. That's on top of the 12.5% increase that all covered California shoppers will face. Some employees will see higher federal tax credits to make up for the spike. Others will have to choose whether to pay the cost out of pocket. Hot, dry weather is coming this weekend, and fire departments are beefing up staffing just in case. Officials say fire danger is traditionally high in October. That's the month when California has experienced many of its deadliest fires. Rob Hartman is battalion chief with San Diego Fire and Rescue. He urges residents to create and practice an emergency plan. And he says when evacuation orders go out, people need to leave immediately.
And the reason that's important is because when something like this happens, there's a lot of resources going to the fire while you're driving out. So we try to get those evacuation orders early to get people out early and unclog the roads so that we have easy access to save your homes.
Hartman says his department will have 5 extra fire engines on standby this weekend. It's been 10 years since 2 massive wildfires raced across San Diego County, burning 3,000 homes and buildings and killing 10 people. KPBS News wants to hear your story about those fires. How did it impact you, your family, and your community, then and now? Tell us your story at the KPBS Listening Post next Wednesday at the Rancho Bernardo Library. We'll be there from 3 to 5 p.m. How much are Americans paying in taxes? NPR senior political editor Ron Elving explains what you need to know about how taxes have changed and what's at stake in the latest Republican overhaul effort.
Taxes. We love to hate them, and we hate to need them. And this Congress, this fall, is going to spend a lot of time debating them. I'm Ron Elving at NPR. Thank you for coming to my office hours. The history of this country can be read as a series of tax revolts, from the Boston Tea Party in 1773 to the latest reincarnation of the Tea Party in 2009. But over all those intervening years, we have also become rather attached to some of the things that taxes pay for. So at this point, it isn't a question of whether or not we have taxes, but how much we tax and who actually winds up paying those taxes. Now, the federal tax burden was originally borne primarily by tariffs and fees on trade. But for the last century or so, the burden has been increasingly shouldered by income and payroll taxes on businesses and on individuals. Congress may raise taxes in time of war or for other causes, or Congress can cut taxes the way they did rather dramatically at the beginning of the presidency of Ronald Reagan. Now, Reagan had been an actor right after World War II in the 1940s. He started making a great deal of money and discovered that the top tax rate in those days was 90% on his last dollar of income. He found that pretty hard to bear. It changed a lot of his view of government and politics. And when he became president in 1981, he introduced a tax cut plan that over 3 years reduced that top rate to about 50%. But he still wasn't satisfied, and in his second term after he was reelected, he put forward a Treasury Department plan that would lower rates still more and pay for that by eliminating a lot of the tax shelters and tax breaks and special treatment that people were able to get to shelter some of their income from those high rates. Now, the Treasury plan ran into some trouble on Capitol Hill, where there were lots of lobbyists for the people who were losing the special treatment they had under the current code. And so, eventually, a group of senators got together and said the way to beat this is to get more radical. Lower the rate all the way from 50% all the way down to 28%, and eliminate even more of the special treatment for certain favored interests in individuals. That turned the trick. They passed it in the Senate. They got it through the House. President Reagan signed it into law. That was the Tax Reform Act of 1986. And that was the most significant change made to our tax system on the federal level since the creation of the income tax itself 100 years ago. Since that time, Congress and a succession of presidents have been busy tinkering with the tax code some more, putting in special treatment and differential treatment for certain kinds of activity, and that, of course, pushing the top rate back up gradually towards 40%. At this point, the business tax has a top rate of 35%, but actually relatively few businesses pay that full 35% because there are lots of ways for them to legally limit their exposure to the tax and pay less than 35% in effect. So it's time to go back at this entire tax reform business again, as Congress has tended to do roughly once every 30 years. Broadly, Congress has two options. They can enact major surgery on the tax code, as they did in 1986, or they could just pass tax cuts, just lower the rates, particularly for certain income groups. That would be popular. That could get a lot of votes from Republicans who have been talking about tax cuts for years. But many Republicans don't want to do that unless those tax cuts are paid for by spending cuts. Otherwise, it would just add to the annual budget deficit, and that adds to the national debt, which is already at $20 trillion and counting. But there just is not a consensus, even within the Republican Party, as to where to cut spending. Where do you spend less money right now? On the military? On roads and bridges? Social Security? Medicare? Perhaps education? So for months, Congress has been looking forward to finishing with health care and turning to the much more fun prospect of cutting taxes and overhauling the tax code. But right now, it looks as though that might be a case of leaping from the frying pan and into the fire. At NPR, I'm Ron Elving. Thank you for coming to my office hours.
I'm Judy Woodruff. On the next News Hour, our America Addicted series continues with a look at how one state is trying new ways to treat opioid abuse. That's Friday on the PBS News Hour.
Clear skies tonight should offer ideal conditions to see a full moon. Santa Ana winds return next week. Jeff Cornish has more in tonight's forecast.
Hope you guys are doing well as we move on into the weekend in San Diego. We're looking good. Now, we're a little concerned about strong rip currents through the weekend. Some agitated seas, big waves out there will enhance the rip current potential. We are also keeping an eye on early next week when Santa Ana winds are likely to increase, and that will increase the fire danger. So that will be a little bit of a concern Monday and Tuesday, potentially into Wednesday. But tonight, it's a quiet night across Southern California. From La Jolla to San Diego, we're in great shape. Expanding the map up to Los Angeles, even in Vegas, the weather is quiet, and that's a good thing, with only a little bit of action on satellite and radar, a few showers and clouds across the southern and central Rockies for now. Tonight, we're expecting to fall to 63, and it's a one-word forecast: clear. And that's a quiet thing. Very nice out there. You'll see that large full moon and into the overnight hours elsewhere, Oceanside, 51-degree low. 63 into Borrego Springs, so we're cooling down pretty nicely here as the seasons do indeed change. Mount Laguna will drop to around 50 degrees. And it's a pleasant Saturday, and our forecast will be dry. Will be a little bit warmer across most areas, including the interior Southwest. A big sunny H across the Four Corners region. That's high pressure, and that will pave the way for a pleasant setup. 83, your expected high into San Diego. A little bit of an offshore breeze will allow that heat to build even down to the coast and into areas like Oceanside and Chula Vista. Mid-80s expected there. Borrego Springs flirting with the century mark will be around 99. That's pretty toasty. And early in the new work week, as the northeastern U.S. gets some much-needed rain from the leftover moisture associated with Nate, we have some dry weather and concerns of the Santa Ana winds returning. So that'll be a bit of an issue that we need to keep an eye on. Becoming breezy Monday and Tuesday, but the coastal forecast, warm Saturday, cooler Sunday and Monday with a little bit more of an onshore breeze, temporarily knocking temperatures down a bit. The inland areas fall from 98 Saturday to 86 on Sunday. It's a bit of a change. It'll become breezy, though, next week. Mountain forecast, upper 70s to the low 60s from Saturday to Monday. We will fall. And for the deserts, we're looking very warm and then a bit cooler. I'm Jeff Cornish for KPBS News.
With forecasts putting New Orleans in the path of Tropical Storm Nate, AP reporter Stacy Plaisant says there's one big question on the mind of residents and business owners. Will the pumps work?
Every time there's a storm in the forecast, Devin Shearman has only one thing on his mind.
Are we going to flood? You know, that's now a thought in everybody who lives in New Orleans.
That's because on August 5th, it wasn't a hurricane, but a strong rainstorm that flooded Katie's restaurant and bar. That storm, along with an earlier flood this summer, exposed major problems at the New Orleans Sewage and Water Board. The agency that runs the city's pumps failed to test pumping capacity ahead of this year's storm season, a practice that was standard in years past.
We absolutely should be testing our pumping systems, our turbines, when it's dry. You know, it's not a time to figure out things when you're underwater and when you're in a kayak.
Several officials have since been fired or abruptly left the agency. But City Council President Jason Williams has called for a full autopsy of the Sewage and Water Board.
So one of the things that I've asked for is a forensic audit of every single dollar that's been sent since 2006 to date, so that we know where that money was spent, we know where it went, we know that it's accounted for.
The independent watchdog group Levees.org says some of the problems date back years, including before Hurricane Katrina, but things appear to spiral in the last 5 years.
Someone obviously dropped the ball. You know, was it funding? Was it manpower? Was it the skill set?
Until hurricane season ends November 1st, Williams says the city remains in triage mode, working to keep things running as best it can. But adding to the urgency is Nate. Even the smallest amount of rain is a threat to New Orleans.
I'm glad they're addressing it finally, but I don't know if you can get my approval for addressing it now after something's happened.
To rebuild that trust, city officials acknowledge it will require working pumps and long-term solutions such as new canals and ponds to give the water a place to go. Stacey Plaisance, The Associated Press, New Orleans.
Another mass shooting in America. We look at whether we can do anything about them. Why did a city council member leak a confidential memo? And what happens now? And we learn how a man sleeping in the street ended up in a jury trial this summer. The KPBS Roundtable is tonight at 8:30. KPBS cinema junkie Beth Accomando says there's a lot to look forward to at the theaters this weekend. The offerings: Blade Runner 2049, Harry Dean Stanton's last film, and a Giallo film series.
Ridley Scott's Blade Runner dazzled audiences in 1982. Now, more than 3 decades later, the eagerly awaited sequel finally arrives. Blade Runner 2049 is a sprawling sci-fi detective tale in which the mystery revolves around what makes us human.
You're a cop. I had your job once.
Things were simpler then.
What do you want?
I want to ask you some questions.
Ryan Gosling is a new Blade Runner who hopes that meeting Harrison Ford's Deckard will provide some answers. But the sequel's more interested in the search than any concrete answers. Despite its scope and scale, it's a film filled with isolated people, aching loneliness, and a quiet, dogged commitment to defining who or what we are. It's not the seminal film the original was, but it's a worthy follow-up and a mesmerizing tone poem. Actor Harry Dean Stanton passed away last month.
Realism is the practice of accepting a situation as it is.
What you're saying is what you see is what you get.
But what you see is not what I get.
And his final film, Lucky, arrives as a bittersweet testament to the actor's easy presence on screen. The film looks to a man who faces old age with wry acceptance. Lucky seems to capture much of the real Harry Dean Stanton, and it provides a perfect close to a magnificent career.
Nice outfit there, cowboy.
Italian giallo cinema of the 70s is something everyone needs to experience at least once. It consumes you like a fever dream and assaults your senses with an audacious excess of style. Giallo has its roots in crime fiction. The word giallo translates literally as yellow, and it became synonymous with a particular style of literary thriller that got its name from the cheap yellow covers of the novels published in Italy in the 50s and 60s. The reason for focusing on giallo right now is that American Genre Film Archives has just made a set of beautifully restored giallo DCP prints available for theatrical distribution. I'll be co-presenting a quartet of titles, starting with What Have You Done to Solange this Sunday. The series continues on Sundays and Mondays through October. Beth Accomando, KPBS News.
Some of the biggest acts in music are taking center stage in San Diego this weekend. Arts Calendar editor Nina Guerin says they plan on packing their shows with new and classic hits.
This is a big weekend for music, so let's start with Depeche Mode, a 1980s group that never quite faded away. The British band is considered one of the early innovators in electronica and new wave music. You may remember songs like Personal Jesus and Enjoy the Silence. Depeche Mode still puts on an energetic live show, and the concert is expected to bring out fans from all over San Diego and Tijuana. Coldplay also makes a return to San Diego, only this time the band moves up to a stadium tour. Coldplay is internationally loved thanks to the band's earnest music and positive messages. Their live shows are always visually stunning, with videos, lasers, and lots of confetti. Finally, we get a visit from a pop music icon. Janet Jackson brings her State of the World tour to San Diego. You'll hear plenty of hits and see some of her trademark choreography. But there will also be some social commentary and personal reflection. After Sunday's shooting in Las Vegas, anyone going to a concert this weekend should expect extra security checks and long lines. Make sure to plan ahead and leave early. For KPBS Arts, I'm Nina Guerin.
Stay up to date on the San Diego art scene with the KPBS Arts Calendar and our arts newsletter. Sign up at kpbs.org/newsletter. Thumb through a stack of major Los Angeles hip-hop albums from the late 80s through the mid-1990s, and you may see one name credited on all of them, Michael Miller. In tonight's KCET Artbound report, we'll take a look at the life and career of this album cover photographer.
Beautiful. 110. Okay, you guys, we're done. When I came back to the States, I came to the agencies, knocked on a few doors, and Herbert's agency, Visage, put me on in 1989. My first job was 3 ads for Vogue, and then I started getting letters from the music labels saying that this guy's amazing, we're going to use him. Here we got some Tupac, NWA. We're going to print this today. Eazy-E and Tupac. A few months later, a guy named Skate Master Tate, he was like the record collector, told me to come over. DJ Mixmaster Muggs was sitting on his couch, and we ended up talking about a new thing he was developing called Cypress Hill. And from there, I went to Cypress Avenue and hung out with all the Be Real and, Mellow Man Ace and all those guys were down there, and Ralphie and everybody. And then it just snowballed into a career in hip hop.
What's interesting about Mike's role in shaping the aesthetic, the vision of what West Coast hip-hop looked like in the 80s through 90s is that the aesthetic that you see in his work is something that has become iconic in the ways in which we think about West Coast hip-hop and LA hip-hop in particular. And the aesthetic that you see is one of LA abandoned. There's a lot of visions of abandonment, visions of decrepitude, burnt out train yards, burnt out warehouses, deserted back alley streets. We have a very particular spatial relationship that we associate with LA hip-hop, and I think Mike's photography certainly either fed out of it or fed into it both ways.
Early Snoop, Too Short, Badass MC8, Alcoholics Exhibit. Here's back in when he first left NWA with the Jerry curls, kind of fun. This is a real iconic shot. This is LA right here. LA Dodger hat, Carhartt, Cortez, Sneaks, 22, Not Escape, California right there. I was in love with NWA's first album. I mean, I must have played it hundreds of times. When I was able to photograph Easy for the Source cover, I was a little nervous, but I was just so stoked to be in the presence of such an iconic rapper. And so as far as this shot goes, I just walked around the neighborhood and I saw a gigantic flag in his parking lot. So I was just like, okay, and that was it. I just come up with ideas and I do them, I make them work. To me, it's one of my favorite shots I have ever taken.
The WC and the Mad Circle album, where WC's down, it's an LA Skid Row. Hobos and bums off the street are in the background. There's something very gritty about that. WC's in this dirty white t-shirt.
We went the night before to get the pass to shoot down on Skid Row. We ended up befriending the guy that ran the alley, and we offered him a case of Old English, 40 ounces. So we ended up going down the next day and everybody posed for the shot. And then the guy in the middle holding Coolio's hand was Scrap Low, the guy that gave us a little hassle before we got the okay, but it was funny.
That story was from Artbound, a production of KCET in Los Angeles. You can find tonight's stories on our website, kpbs.org/evening edition. And finally, we leave you with a new song from Hamilton creator Lin-Manuel Miranda to help hurricane victims in Puerto Rico. Thanks for joining us. Have a great evening.
San Sebastián, mi viejo San Juan, Isabela, Maricao, Fajardo, Dorado, Hormiguero, Sumacao, Trujillo, Atillo. Vega baja, toda alta, toda baja, Mayagüez, otra vez, Aguadilla, Quebradilla, Guayanilla, Juanadilla, y Calle, hey. It's almost like rain.